Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're launching a clinical investigation into one of the absolute most terrifying entities in human history. We're stripping away the campfire myths and the supernatural ghost stories to unmask a legendary terror using cold, hard modern pathology.
Imagine a creature described as a terrifying, emaciated, and giant humanoid monster with an insatiable craving for human flesh and a heart of ice. You've probably heard of it. This is the Wendigo. It's a creature pulled straight from Algonquinian folklore, and it perfectly captures that deep, primal fear of winter starvation and, of course, the absolute darkest taboo of human survival: cannibalism.
Now, in the folklore, you don't just happen to cross paths with a Wendigo, you actually become one. The story goes that when someone is pushed to the absolute brink by freezing winters and severe starvation, and they commit that ultimate taboo of eating human flesh, they undergo a horrifying transformation. They turn into this decaying, skeletal beast. And the worst part, they develop an insatiable hunger that literally grows with every single meal. It's a terrifying concept, right? But as we're going to see, the biological truth behind this myth is actually way darker.
So let's pivot from the freezing woods of North America to a chilling medical reality that unfolded in the 1950s in Papua New Guinea. On one hand, we have this folklore born from winter starvation and taboo cannibalism. But on the other, we have a staggering real-world scenario with the Four tribe. They engaged in ritualistic cannibalism as a funeral rite to honor their dead relatives. And unfortunately, this deeply ingrained practice birthed a completely devastating neurological disease known as Kuru.
To put this into perspective, between 1957 and 1961 alone, Kuru ravaged the Four tribe, killing over 1,000 people. And what's absolutely crucial to understand here is exactly who was dying. This disease predominantly struck down women and children. Why? Well, during the burial rituals, the men would typically eat the muscle tissue, while the women and children were given the brains of their deceased relatives to consume. And those brains were highly infectious.
Now, the authorities strictly banned this ritualistic cannibalism in the 1950s, which effectively stopped the primary spread. You'd think the nightmare was over, right? But astoundingly, it wasn't. The symptoms of Kuru can actually lie completely dormant in the human body for over 50 years. I mean, think about that. Medical professionals were still recording new cases between 1996 and 2004, literally half a century after the infection first entered these patients' systems.
This insanely long incubation period completely baffled the medical community at the time. They were aggressively hunting for a pathogen. But it wasn't a virus, it wasn't a bacterium. It completely defied all known medical logic because whatever this infectious agent was, it lacked nucleic acids. That means it had absolutely zero DNA and zero RNA. So the massive question was, if it isn't a virus or a bacterium, what on earth is it?
Well, the true culprit is what we now call a prion. The term was actually coined by scientist Stanley Prusiner back in 1982. A prion is essentially a self-propagating, rogue, misfolded protein. It's this infectious little particle that is completely devoid of genetic material, yet it possesses the terrifying ability to convert normal, healthy cellular proteins into abnormal, practically indestructible shapes.
Let's break down the mechanism here because it builds into this terrifying microscopic cascade. It's like a biological domino effect. First, a rogue prion enters a healthy human brain. Then it forces the normal cellular proteins to change structure, specifically converting normal alpha helices into abnormal beta-pleated sheets. Next, these newly abnormal proteins clump together, aggregating into solid masses that completely resist the body's natural digestion and defenses. And finally, as these masses grow, the brain tissue physically dissolves into a sponge-like mass. A single misfolded protein literally forces healthy neurons to self-destruct.
And this is exactly where the monster myth crashes right into clinical reality. If you look at the folkloric treats of the Wendigo, they map directly onto the brutal clinical progression of transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, or TSEs, like Kuru and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Think about it. The skeletal frame of the Wendigo, that perfectly mirrors the severe physical wasting seen in TSE patients. The loss of humanity, that maps to severe dementia and psychosis. And those unnatural twitching movements of the beast, that's clinical ataxia, tremors, and myoclonus, a complete and catastrophic loss of muscle control.
In fact, the very word Kuru translates directly to shake in the local Four language. Because as these prions ravage the nervous system, patients suffer a rapid, devastating loss of motor skills.
It usually starts with tremors that look a lot like violent shivering, and then it progresses to choreoathetosis. That's a clinical term for severe, involuntary writhing and jerking, which ultimately reduces the patient to a primal, horrifying state of physical suffering.
But honestly, the physical wasting is only half the horror here. Clinically, the neurological decay completely strips away the patient's mind, which is a perfect parallel to the Wendigo's mindless frenzy. When we strip away the supernatural elements, we see real patients experiencing rapidly progressive dementia, incredibly violent mood swings, and sudden, uncontrollable outbursts of laughter. Eventually, this terrifying descent into madness ends in complete mutism and unresponsiveness. The person they once were is just gone, entirely dissolved.
So what is physically happening inside the skull to cause this extreme madness? The clinical term is vacuolation. As these rogue prions replicate, they are literally dissolving the brain from the inside out. They cause massive cellular death, which leaves these microscopic holes all throughout the cerebral cortex. The brain tissue literally begins to look and act physically like a kitchen sponge. Now you might be wondering, okay, how do we destroy it? Well, this is where the medical reality becomes far more frightening than any ghost story we could ever tell. Prions are horrifyingly resilient. They are basically a pathogen that is impervious to standard sterilization. They easily survive boiling. They are completely resistant to standard medical autoclaving at 121 degrees Celsius. They laugh off chemical disinfectants like formaldehyde and ethylene oxide, and they easily withstand incredibly high doses of ionizing and UV irradiation. Basically, you cannot kill what is technically not even alive.
All of this leads us to a cold, hard, and quite frankly, terrifying medical fact: 100%. For prion diseases like CJD and Kuru, there is a 100% mortality rate. Let that sink in. There is no cure. There's no vaccine. Once those clinical symptoms begin to show, a guaranteed death almost always follows within a single year. Once that biological protocol has been initiated, it is completely unstoppable.
The Wendigo isn't some supernatural beast stalking you through the winter woods. It's just a primitive human interpretation. It was humanity's early attempt to put a face to a microscopic glitch that destroys the human brain from the inside out. As it turns out, biology is the true source of all monsters. A simple protein, just folded the wrong way, is far more terrifying, far more unstoppable, and far more devastating than any supernatural fiction we could ever dream up.
Thanks for joining me for this explainer. If you want to keep unmasking medical mysteries and diving deep into the clinical investigations of dark science, make sure to subscribe to BioCosmos. But before you go, I want to leave you with a haunting thought. If a simple misfolded protein can spawn the terrifying legend of the Wendigo, what other invisible glitches are lying dormant out there in the wild, just waiting for the right conditions to wake up?